were extremely poor. His older brothers were alcoholics. They had a paranoid schizophrenic father. And so he grew up with that nervousness.
Don Knotts died on February 24th, 2006. And now, 20 years after his death, his daughter Karen is finally opening up about the man behind the laughter and what her father was really like when the camera stopped rolling. According to Karen, Don could make an entire room laugh while quietly battling anxiety, insecurity, and depression. The nervousness audiences loved on television wasn't just something he created for Barney Fife. That fear had been with him since childhood, long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. And somehow, even during his final hours, Don was still making his family laugh. He joked so much that Karen eventually had to leave the room because she couldn't stop laughing. And that is a moment she still regrets. But how did Don become the man so many people admired? To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning, a boy nobody was expecting. Jesse Donald Knotts was born on July 21, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia. You can call his birth an accident because he arrived so many years after his brothers that his closest sibling was already 14 years old. By the time Don was old enough to understand what was happening around him, his father, William, was mostly confined to bed, battling schizophrenia and alcoholism. His condition became so severe that during one argument, he even threatened his young son with a knife. Growing up in that kind of home left a deep mark on Don. He was often pale, thin, and sickly as a child, and he struggled to feel safe in his own home. So how does a frightened young boy escape a reality like that? Don found his escape in his imagination. He began creating imaginary characters and little dramas in his mind, giving himself a world he could disappear into whenever life became too difficult. At the time, no one could have known that this childhood escape would eventually become the foundation of his career. But while Don was finding comfort in the imaginary world he had created, the real one around him was becoming even more painful. His two older brothers, William and Sid, also struggled with alcohol, adding even more tension to a household that was already unstable. And then, suddenly, William died from a severe asthma attack. Not long after, Don's father died too, leaving 13-year-old Don without the father he had spent years fearing. For Don, it was a painful mix of grief and relief. The chaos at home was finally over, but the insecurity it had created stayed with him. His mother, Elsie, encouraged him to try ventriloquism, and Don built an act around a wooden dummy he named Danny. He performed it at local church functions and other events, slowly becoming more comfortable in front of an audience. However, little did he know that Danny would soon become an important part of his life as he left home to build his career. From imagination to building a career. At 18, Don took his first real shot at a career in New York City. But it went badly. A casting director told him he had no future in entertainment and should give up. So Don went home and took a job plucking chickens at a local grocery store. But then World War II changed everything. Don joined the Army's Special Services Battalion and spent nearly 3 years traveling through the Pacific with a comedy troupe called Stars and Gripes, performing for American troops. And somewhere along the way, Don learned something important. He could make people laugh. But there was one problem. He was still sharing the stage with Danny, the wooden dummy his mother had encouraged him to use. Eventually, Don got tired of Danny stealing the spotlight. During a performance on a troop ship in the South Pacific, he threw the dummy overboard. Danny was gone, and Don was finally ready to find out what he could do on his own. When he returned home in 1946, he finished his degree at West Virginia University and headed back to New York. But once again, the city didn't welcome him. He faced rejection after rejection before finally landing small roles in radio and television. Then, after years of struggling, one opportunity finally changed everything. Don landed a role in the Broadway show No Time for Sergeants, where he appeared alongside a young actor named Andy Griffith. The two became friends, and that friendship would soon open a much bigger door. When Griffith later starred in his own television show about a small-town sheriff, Don joined him as the nervous and overconfident Deputy Barney Fife. And this time, America noticed. Barney Fife turned Don Knotts into one of the most recognizable faces on television and earned him 5 Emmy Awards. From the outside, it looked like Don had finally made it. But success couldn't erase what he had carried since childhood. The nervousness, the insecurity, and the fear of failure were still there. The difference was that now, millions of people were laughing with him. Yet behind that laughter was the same frightened boy who had spent his childhood looking for a way to feel safe. The price of success. While Don was climbing toward stardom, he fell in love with a woman named Catherine Metz. Catherine was a minister's daughter, and when she first met Don, she was already engaged to someone else. But Don won her over, and they married in 1947. At first, their marriage seemed like a storybook ending. But fame changed things. Catherine struggled to fit into Don's new Hollywood life, and after 13 years of marriage and 2 children, the couple divorced. Don didn't stay single for long, and in 1974, he married Laura Lee Chukna, a former airline stewardess. For a while, it seemed like he had finally found some stability both at home and in his career. But that marriage also ended after only a few years. Then Don met Frances Yarborough. The two had a significant age difference, but that didn't stop them from falling in love. They married in 2002, and Frances later said she was drawn to Don's vulnerable and gentle side. It was Don's 3rd marriage, and by most accounts, it was also his happiest. For the first time, it seemed like Don had found something that fame had never been able to give him, a peaceful home life. But that peace would not last forever. Just as Don appeared to have found happiness in both his personal life and career, his health began to decline. And this time, there was no character to hide behind. No Barney Fife, no wooden dummy, just Don, facing the hardest chapter of his life, the final battle. In 2003, Don started having serious problems with his eyesight. He struggled to read, drive, and even recognize faces clearly. Doctors diagnosed him with macular degeneration, a condition that was slowly affecting his vision. For Don, the thought of losing his sight was terrifying. After spending his entire life on stage and in front of cameras, he suddenly struggled with things that once seemed effortless. The condition also placed enormous pressure on his personal life. His marriage to Laura Lee had already ended in 1983, and Don continued to deal with the emotional impact of his declining health. But his eyesight wasn't his only health problem. Don had smoked for many years, and although he eventually quit, the damage had already been done. Then, in the early 2000s, doctors discovered that he had lung cancer. Don kept his illness largely private, even from some of the people closest to him. By 2006, his condition had become much worse. At 81 years old, Don was no longer the energetic performer millions had known on television. And this was when Karen began to see the side of her father that the public had rarely known. For years, Don had hidden just how much he was carrying. Behind the laughter was a man still dealing with the fear, anxiety, and insecurities that had followed him since childhood. Karen later opened up about those struggles, revealing how deeply they had stayed with him, even after he became one of America's most beloved comedians. But in his final days, something else stood out. Even as Don's health continued to decline, his sense of humor never left him. Andy Griffith, his longtime friend and former co-star, came to visit him at his bedside. He held Don's hand and reminded him how much he was loved. And then, even while lying on his deathbed, Don did what he had always done. He made everyone laugh. He delivered a joke so unexpected that Karen and her stepmother had to leave the room because they couldn't stop laughing. It was one final reminder of the man Don had always been. And then, on February 24, 2006, Don Knotts died at the age of 81, leaving behind a lifetime of laughter, unforgettable characters, and millions of people who would never forget him. The man behind Barney Fife wasn't always the confident comedian everyone loved. Deep down, he was still the frightened little boy who had grown up in an unsafe home, and somehow turned that fear into laughter for millions of people. So after hearing it all, which part of Don Knotts' story surprised you the most? And does it change the way you watch Barney Fife now? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more fascinating stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.